Coming into the room, hello all, welcome to Voices of Equity. I'm Crystal Sinkoff. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm the senior manager of DEI at Zapproved. I'd like to do a quick shout out to Katie and Cinder Staffing for helping sponsor these events and put them together. Thank you so much, Cinder, for your support, and thank you for helping promote voices in our community. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Pharoah Bolding, who will be talking about the privilege of wanting to get back to normal. Pharoah, the mic is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Hope y'all have gotten to your Friday and you're doing well and you haven't felt the urge / need to shake a coworker, which is always great. As a person who's been in HR for 9 years, we don't want you shaking your coworkers. Oh, all right. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to dive into our time together this morning. All right. Okay, so this morning we're going to be talking about something that's, I'm sure a lot of you have been encountering, a lot of you have been seeing happen in your workplaces, in your communities, and it's this talk about getting back to normal. And today I want to take some time to start unpacking some of that privilege of wanting to get back to normal. So before I get into all that, I'm sure some of y'all in this space know me. Other folks are probably like, who in the heck is this guy? So the quick spiel on me is that, as you probably saw in some of the things that went out for this talk, I call myself the world's greatest comic drawing HR professional. But the work that I do is based in the space of equity and talking about how systems, processes, and the way that we work in our workplaces often does not fall into a space of equity and inclusion, dismantling white supremacy, and being and maintaining an anti-racist stance on things. So today, that's pretty much what our conversation is going to be about. How this privilege of this, quote unquote, wanting to get back to normal plays in these spaces that I just touched on. So normal is dangerous. Let's just throw it out there. And honestly, the only way we can have this conversation is to state one simple fact that is at the root of this discourse. Wanting to and pushing for a quote unquote return to normal during an ongoing pandemic that has impacted marginalized communities and community of color, that is white supremacy. No debate. I'm not going to debate you on that. Don't at me. It is white supremacy. The comforts of what the society we live in deems as normal. And we have to understand this is a society we live in driven by oppression and wealth and white privilege. We're never meant for people, Black folks, brown folks, Native Indigenous folks, or marginalized communities to enjoy and partake in equal and equitable ways. And real talk, most white people want their comforts back, even if those comforts mean that systems and spaces that historically and continually harm others are primed to resume their harming duties. The push from our federal and local governments, the push from the companies we work for, and even the pushes in the communities that we live in for this quote unquote return to normal is a push that refuses to acknowledge two things. The first thing is that everyone's quote unquote normal is not the same, especially when you factor in such things intersectionality, intersectional identities, and systemic oppression that so many people of color, queer identifying people, and people with disabilities grapple with every day. The other thing is that for so many people, especially white people and people of color with power and privilege, returning to normal signifies a return to not having to face the discomfort that comes with being asked to be actively engaged in self-work, actively anti-racist, and willing to dismantle their connections to and perpetuation of white supremacy and oppressive states. And I say this because being sheltered indoors and limited outlets to distract people from the reality that has always been right outside their doors forced many white people and people of color with privilege to be expected to be empathetic and compassionate. And the truth is they don't want to have to do that anymore because they didn't necessarily want to do those things in the first place. The thing is, this normal shows us that the pandemic didn't change a thing. I mean, we are now over 1.5 years into a global pandemic. And that pandemic has altered so many things and has impacted so many things. And that includes the way we work, the way we meet and connect, and the way society views public safety. And even with all these impacts during this mentally, emotionally, and physically draining pandemic, one thing it hasn't impacted is whether we care about our fellow human beings on a deeper level. And I know that probably sounds callous to some folks, but I want to throw a couple of case in point points out there to touch on why that is so. In May 2021, a Morning Consult political poll found that under half of US adults, 48%, currently hold favorable views of Black Lives Matter movement. And that's down from 61% from a year ago. 41% of US Americans view Black Lives Matter unfavorably, and that's up from 30%. Police brutality and Black murders at the hands of police officers remain at the same levels they were prior to George Floyd's murder, as do the numbers of cases where officers are held accountable. Due to anti-Asian settlements and hate stoked by the previous presidential administration, hate crimes against the AAPI community saw a 3,000% increase after a 10-year decrease in reported hate crimes, with more than 1,800 racist incidents against Asian Americans in the United States being reported over an 8-week period from March to May of 2020. Unemployment in communities of color and marginalized communities continues to be high in relation to unemployment numbers for white US Americans. People of color were and still are overwhelmingly in roles and professions that are on the front lines of the pandemic. Even the organizations and companies that switched to predominantly remote work models, and even as the COVID-19 Delta variant is leading to an increase in COVID cases across the country. With mask mandates lifted nationwide, many organizations and companies are pushing to have all their staff on site in a physical space with one another, disregarding how remote work supports their staff members with disabilities and their staff members of color who have reported for decades that white supremacist workplace culture and workplace ableism is harmful to them on practically every level. Results from a January 2021 Gallup poll showed that 44% of people currently working from home want to continue working remotely because it suits them and their needs. 39% will prefer to return to the office, but 17% want to keep working remotely because of COVID. In general, remote workers cite not having to commute as a major perk, as well as having more room to work to balance work, family, and leisure and self-care. Like all the aforementioned are lessons that we all should have learned. I mean, these are all insights we all should have fell upon and started giving some self-reflection during this time. But white supremacy is going to be white supremacy. And it shows us that this is not the case. Truth is, the decision makers in our workplaces are still in denial about the long overdue need to repair the harmful effects of white supremacist workplace culture on employees of color and employees from marginalized communities. I mean, hell, some have overtly stated their unwillingness to address these issues. I'm sure you've seen press releases from all sorts of tech companies and some major organizations basically saying that we're not talking about this anymore. This is not a topic. We're not addressing this. Hate crimes and police brutality are still harming millions of US Americans. The numbers have not gone down. We still have Latinx families and Latinx children in cages. DACA is still under siege. And we're still doing all of this with no acknowledgement of continuous harm of Black and African people, Native and Indigenous folks, API communities, Latinx communities, and marginalized communities on unceded land. This pandemic has not created communities of care. And that's what, at the beginning of all this, I think a lot of us were like, well, if this doesn't get people into a space where they want to support and help others, I don't know what will. And I just want to say at this point, yeah, I don't know what will either, because this pandemic has not created the communities of care among white folks and people of color with privilege. If anything, it's created a segment of our society who wants to run away from empathy and compassion and get back to a space where these concepts are taboo and ignored. And please understand this. No one who doesn't benefit from quote unquote normal is clamoring to quote unquote return to normal. Like for myself, for many folks who are people of color, who are Black, who are queer identifying, who have disabilities, we know that normal means return back to the status quo. And the status quo means we are being forced back into spaces that aren't created for us to be able to thrive, have boundaries, expect safety, and even take care of ourselves. So as a white person or a person of color with privilege, if you take something away from this little bit of time we have together today, there's one primary thing you need to consider if you want to start disrupting the normal conversations happening around you and the urges to quote unquote return to normal in yourself, your workplaces, and your community. And it's one question. Always ask who's normal. When you find yourself saying you want things to return to normal, ask yourself, whose normal am I talking about returning to? Reflect on your privilege. Reflect on your white privilege, or if you're a person of color, your adjacency to white privilege. If you're a person of color with privilege, think about how much you legitimately benefit from normal, and then think about how others do not benefit from that normal, and what that normal and how that normal is framed, I should say. Recognize that if you're privileged enough to pine for a return to normal, you are likely privileged enough to never have had to deeply care about what normal means outside of your privilege bubble. Take that reflection and place yourself in the shoes of those who do not have your privilege or access to the benefits of returning to normal, like I was saying. Then check yourself. Be honest with yourself, check yourself. Be willing to check yourself. And check your managers and leaders at work too, when they begin pushing for these conversations. And they don't want to talk about all the nuance that comes into this concept of quote unquote returning to normal. Ask them the same questions you ask yourself. Don't be a bystander in this. And don't watch as your coworkers and friends are forced to come back to harm. This is a moment of taking care of each other. If you didn't do it anytime during this pandemic, now is the time to step in, step up, alleviate some of the burden that they carry, that your colleagues carry, to fight for themselves and fight alongside them for once. Don't do this later. Don't do this like hours after a meeting. Do it in real time. Make it uncomfortable for the powers that be so that your coworkers of color and coworkers from marginalized communities don't always have to be the voice in the room. Because honestly, we're tired of always being the voice in the room. We're vilified for being the voice in the room. And we don't always want to have to do that or be that. So this is your opportunity to not only shake your own conventions of what you believe is normal and what the normalcy you want to go back to, but to help shake this up in your workplace and make this an uncomfortable conversation. Because this needs to be an uncomfortable conversation. There's way too many people who can have this conversation and I have to address it. The last thing I want to say is, with all of that, please note that this is not your blind side moment. If you've ever seen that movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is not your moment to be a white savior. This is a step in your ongoing work to try to be an accomplice and a support to people who do not have the access to the privilege that you have. So I will stop what I'm saying right there, but I want to open up the floor for questions.
All right, let me see here. I'm scrolling through the chat. Jordan, have you seen any questions pop up that we should focus on?
We had one from Benita. She asked, what does it mean by person of color with privilege?
Oh yeah, let me address that. Thank you for that question, Benita. When I say person of color with privilege, I'll use myself as an example. I grew up poor. I grew up on the east side of Detroit. We were po. We couldn't even get the OR at the end of the word po. We were po. But I woke up one morning a few years ago and realized suddenly I had a whole lot of privilege. Like, I'm a homeowner in a predominantly white city. I've had the opportunity to talk to rooms of people like this and have their attention, something that Black people do not always get the opportunity to do, let me tell you. I have an adjacency to white privilege where I don't benefit from white privilege. Like, I don't have all the power that comes with white privilege, but I do have privileges that people of color don't typically have, because I've found myself in a station of life where I'm doing fairly well for myself. And with that, doing fairly well for yourself comes some particular kinds of privilege. Like, I have the privilege to be able to go to a meat market and buy a nice quality cut of meat. And that's probably the whitest thing I'm going to say today, that I went to a meat market and I bought a quality cut of meat. But I have that privilege. You know, I grew up trying to get the deal meat at the supermarket. You know what I mean? And now I have the privilege to be able to go out and buy nice things and not have to be scared that my bank account's at zero. There's a particular point of privilege to that. It's not a kind of privilege that all people of color find themselves with. And that's what I mean. It's when you're a person of color who has, on average, more privilege and more opportunity than most people of color will find themselves with in their lifetimes. So I'm talking about people of color who also have never really had to think about racism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, because they've lived a particular kind of privileged life where these weren't topics of conversation. Like, I had a conversation with my parents at age 10 that the police were never going to look at me as a child again. There are people of color who've never had to have that conversation. There are Black folks who have never felt the need to have that conversation with their children because of the circumstances and the situation and the privilege that they've had. So that's what I mean by a person of color with privilege. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you.
Well,
Farrah.
thanks, Farrell. We have another one from Hazel. She asks, what's a great teachable response to someone who says, I can't wait to go back to normal?
That's a good question. I'm not going to give you my answer per se, because I'm a tool when it comes to these kinds of things. I'm just going to be really real. Like, my response is not going to be everybody's response. I would say the question that I stated and when I was talking, what is normal to you? What do you consider normal? Because I think that's the starting point. I think that's a teachable moment. When someone says, oh my God, I can't wait to return back to normal. What I've often said is, well, what is normal? What do you consider normal? Because I guarantee you that what's going to come out of their mouth is going to be this combination of white privilege. These things like, I love to just go to a sporting event. That's great. You want to sit in a 50,000 person arena. That's a particular level of privilege, and not care that there is a highly contagious disease going around. Like, let's talk about what normal is for you. Because a lot of things that people want to get back to normal to, quote unquote, half of them are distractionary. Because, to be quite honest, normalcy in the United States is a lot of distractionary items. It's a lot of things to do to not deal with things. It's the way our culture is built. It's this individualist culture we live in. And the other part of it is really kind of like, I just want to get back to the things I used to do where no one questioned anything, and I didn't even have to question myself. But all of that's centered in whiteness, because whiteness doesn't have to answer questions about what normal is, because whiteness created, quote unquote, normal, or what we're all supposed to prescribe to as normal. So the question is always be like, oh, I hear you. What is normal to you? What is the normal you want to get back to? Because I think that opens up a bigger conversation depending on what your relationship with that person about. Well, have you considered normal for other people? And how this looks for other people, like how scary normal could be. And that's if you want to build a rapport and you want to have an ongoing discussion with that person. If you don't want to have an ongoing discussion with that person, I just say make them squirmy and ask them like, well, who's normal? And have them account for what that normalcy is. Have that difficult conversation. Make them engage in that difficult conversation. Because I think that says more about someone than anything else.
Thank you, Pharoah, for that answer. We are out of time, and I do see a lot of questions coming up in the chat. I know that if we had more time, we would get to them. This is a bigger topic of conversation than you can put into 20 minutes, but I think it's a conversation we need to be having with each other. So thank you, Pharoah, for all of your insight and dropping that knowledge on us. I think that was really just is really meaningful. And I appreciate you. And I appreciate everyone for being here. I hope you continue these conversations in your organizations. And hopefully I'll see you for the next conversation in August. Thank you.
Take care, y'all. Thank you.
Thanks, Pharoah. Oh. All right. Folks are leaving. Did we see what the number was of the number of folks in the room? I was not even paying attention. I was paying attention to the conversation.
I saw 63 at the height, I think.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I saw us max out at 63.
Awesome.
That's really great. That's so awesome. Wow.
How do you feel it went, Pharoah?
I feel it went fine. I'd always love to have more time to address questions. There were a few questions in the chat that have been things that I've been talking about, folks, like people want to leave this country at this point. Like, I think that's because my answer to that is I'm not going to convince you to help you convince our friends to stay here.
Right.
I mean, truth be told, racism was everywhere. Not like you're gonna dodge white people. So unless you go to the farthest ends of the world, you're not gonna dodge white people anyway. And even there, you're not gonna really dodge white people the way you like to. But I do think that there's a particular kind of racism in the United States. There's a particular kind of covert racism. I think, often we talk about the overt so much, but I think the thing that weighs on a lot of people in the United States is that it's overt racism, but it's also very covert. It's the things where we get gaslit every day. You get tired of having to defend yourself in every space. And you watch as all the white people turn their head the other way because they don't want to be a part of that conversation. And you watch as your colleagues of color are also feeling the pain and they don't want to get into it either. So you end up on a dinghy in the water alone.
Yeah.
It's even harder in cities like Portland. Portland isn't very POC friendly. Portland isn't Black friendly. I've lived here almost 13 years now, and I don't enjoy a lot of people.
Oh, no.
That's the politest way I can put that without using expletive. I don't enjoy a lot of Portlanders. They're not my cup of tea, but I got work to do here. So I'm here because I got stuff to do. But I would never want to convince someone to feel like they should stay somewhere where they're being harmed. If you got to get out of the city, do it. You got to get out of the state, do it. You got to get out of the country. If you can, if you're privileged enough to be able to, do it. Like, you have to find a place where you feel like you can be you and not feel the anxiety that comes with being Black. Like, it would be very interesting to live somewhere one day where I didn't freak out every morning about where my wallet was. So I can make sure I have and I carry like all the identification, even stuff they tell you shouldn't carry in your wallet. Somebody might say, well, this doesn't look legit, so I need to have a backup. But that's just the reality. Like, it would be great to not live in that reality. I understand the need for people to not want to live in that reality and find a reality that allows them to have the space to be themselves. But I'm never going to try to convince anybody to stay in this country. You do what you got to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time. I'm so grateful that you chose to do this with us.
Oh yeah, most definitely. I appreciate y'all allowing me the space again. I've been having this conversation for like a year now. I've had this conversation in multiple workplaces for multiple companies. It's a hard space for people to feel like they can be in without getting in their feelings about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Because, often people are like, well, there's nothing wrong with normal. Yeah, for you. Like, and that's why I try to make sure, like, this isn't like, yes, definitely for people of color, normal is a whole different thing. But like, we're not even factoring in folks with disabilities. Like, I have so many colleagues and friends who have disabilities, who struggle with trying to get their employers to understand their needs. And it's like, you thought those needs went away over the last 15, 16 months. Like, if it's easier to work at home, maybe you should figure out how people can work from home. If they don't need to be in the office, maybe we figure out ways where people can still maintain that space they need to get and do their jobs. Like, this isn't that hard. We've been doing this, most of us, for at least 15, 16 months.
Yeah. I don't think those employers will last too long.
Yeah.
That are requiring that of people.
Yeah. I've spoken with a few organizations that, like, we want to get back now. And it's like, really, right now? You sure you want to do that right now? Like, there's so many things you can do right now. That's what you want to do right now. One of my former employees, they brought people back in June.
Wow.
People have been back in their offices since June.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, there was nowhere near safety. It was just like, as soon as Kate Brown was like, masks are going away, they brought everybody back, full staff, not even like a incremental rollout. Nope, everyone's back day one. And those employees are frustrated.
Kimball, stop. I'm sorry, I'm watching my friend's dog.
But no, I appreciate the opportunity to have a space and the be in space with y'all. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pharoah. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Jordan. And there's a few people
Thanks,
who hung
Pharoah.
on the call. Thank you for all your help putting this together. And I'll keep following you, Pharoah, and let's keep in touch. I
Yeah.
appreciate you. Thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
appreciate it
I'm
too.
around.
Oh, with the thank you email that we send out, do you want to share your slides?
Oh yeah, I will send you a PDF of those slides.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so
Mhm.
much for your time, Pharoah. It was really great to hear that.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, most definitely. Thanks, y'all. Y'all have a great rest of your day and
Get excited.
weekend.
Bye.
See you
Bye.
later. Bye.